Welcome to the God is Not an Asshole podcast. If you are one of the many people done with religious dogmatism, hang on. You might sense transcendence, but your church or other faith community never seem to get off the ground. You realize that honoring your conscience means more than fitting in and keeping hard-to-explain rules? Hang on. You could probably think of the goodness in your tradition, and you tried your best to save that baby, but there's so much bathwater. Join your hosts, David Norman Moore Jr. in California and Carrie Connolly in New Jersey, who are collaborating to bring on guests who have found life on the other side of fundamentalism. Guests with stories of how they have liberated themselves from beliefs that divide us from each other. None of our guests' narratives are identical, but we hope you'll find something in common with each of them. We invite you to experience our common bond as we all inspire even more of us to embrace the true self.
So I'm wearing this hat and I know somebody's going to ask, what it means. And I don't know how to flip it, to mirror. So it's, so it says for M-A-L. And it's because, one of my sons a while ago, one of his roommates, and his name is Matthew too. His roommate was struck and killed by a drunk driver and her name, was Mallory. And so that's why we have hats like this.
I love that. Thank you so much for telling us that.
I'm really glad you described the story behind that, because I thought it was like some cool way of saying formal, like you're going to a formal. And so, right. And so like, but, so well, I mean, it's certainly, it's more touching and more beautiful the way you told it. So.
Yeah. So, Matthew, we're just going to have a conversation today, like let the conversation flow. We're already recording, but I just wanted to, just kind of, say that the title of the podcast is God is Not an Asshole, right? So, we are going to be just talking a little bit about, your experience with the assholey God, and then how you found the more loving God. If you did, right? So, that's what we, maybe you didn't, I don't know. But I think
some days I do. Some days I do.
Yeah. Some days that's, I think, key, right?
Okay. So let me just say this, that, kind of like a full disclosure thing. If I get weepy or something, it's not menopause or anything like that. It's been a very tender time, and moving my mom out of her house to my sister's house and looking at pictures and all that. But this morning, unfortunately, I didn't order a hard copy of any of your books, Matthew. But I downloaded When God Made You and listened to it, the audio book. And so this morning when I went out for my walk, I was listening to your book, and there's a school 5 minutes away from here. And so I was walking, and all of these kindergartners were, filling the yard and, with that noise that only kindergartners can make. And I was listening to, that poetic expression of affirmation of humanity for everybody, and particularly for children. And I was just like, wow, this is so beautiful. And then something else happened. It was setting me up, because as I kept walking, these two women were walking their dogs toward me. And I didn't know them. Don't remember ever seeing them. But they acted like they knew me. And we greeted each other as we kept walking, and then they said, we read your book. Okay. So I don't even know who these women are. And I don't know, I guess I'm not that hard to recognize in Santa Barbara because of the demographic and all of that. But, and I said, you've made my morning. And, one of them said, do you ever meet people where just their presence gives you chills? And I said, yeah. And she said, every time I see you. Now, I don't remember ever seeing her, but she said, every time I see you, that's the feeling I get. And I just, tears just, started coming out because of because, I'm dealing, it's Black History Month, of course, and I'm dealing with the responsibility of addressing anti-Blackness publicly in our community, called on to make speeches and that kind of thing. And it was heavy. And when they did that, what I appreciated, because there were white women, I appreciate, whenever I see someone who's spending the time and the energy and the work to expand, it's so healing for me. And so that's where I am meeting you today, Matthew. That's the place I'm coming from. And thank you so much for your affirmation of humanity.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing that story. I actually did I did my research on you a little bit this morning too. So it was fun to meet you via, your online presence. And so thank you for those words. So.
Well, I love you.
So Matthew and David, I don't know if I ever, I feel that the rawness that you're experiencing, David, and having been through the space that, with my mom that, recently, and my dad's passing a few years ago, I totally know what you're going through, and it's real. It's real. So David, I don't know if you know how Matthew and I met. Matthew and I actually met, I think the first time officially we met was in JFK Airport when I walked up to all the cool kids that I was about to travel to the Middle East with, and I was terrified. But I was like, I knew them because we were going on a press tour, and I recognized them because I had done all of my research, and I walked up to them at the table, and they were in some restaurant, and I was just like, hi, I'm with the progressive.
We were having sushi.
Yes, I'm like waiting to catch our flight to go to Jordan. And it was such an amazing time together. And I had the incredible opportunity to get to know Matthew, who was not yet a children's author, I believe, correct?
No, I was, we did that in 2017. I guess I had
16.
So we were a couple months shy of that first book coming out.
Yep.
Yeah, because the first book came out.
Okay, quick question. I have to ask quick. Sorry. How was the sushi? You don't remember?
It was airport sushi, so it was okay. It hit the spot. But I'll tell you, it's funny because prior to meeting Carrie, I remember us all like sitting around thinking, she's the only person that nobody knows, or none of us had ever met. And how is she going to fit in with, because like we had our own little group, and it was like, it couldn't have been a more perfect fit for what we were about to experience. We had fun. We laughed. We cried.
Oh my gosh.
It was a really, we had one of those like youth group mission trip experiences where everyone becomes best friends for, however long. So
yes. And we were like the progressives in the back of the bus, right? Like the tatted up, pierced progressives in the back of the bus with all the there were the Episcopalians, and like they had us separated by demographic, and they'd all come up to us and they were like, what is a progressive Christian anyway? And we were like, I don't know. I don't know. What are we? I don't really know.
So it was fun.
Yeah. So Matthew, you grew up with a history of God, with God, right? A relationship with God. So why don't we start off with that? Tell us a little bit about your relationship with God and how it started.
Well, I mean, I don't remember a time when I didn't have some sort of reference to God in my life. Like God has always been a presence in my story. When I was 4 years old, my parents decided to leave the Methodist church that we were attending, and we were one of the very first families to start this brand new Baptist church that was beginning in my small hometown. And it was an independent fundamental Baptist church that completely, like, our lives were completely changed almost not overnight, but over a very short period of time. One Sunday it was fine for my mom and my sisters to dress however they wanted. And the next Sunday, it was no longer okay for them to wear certain clothes. On one Sunday, it was fine for us to listen to whatever music we wanted to listen to. And the next Sunday, it was no longer okay to listen to that kind of music. Like, it was a very much an affecting, all encompassing change in our story.
Wow.
And so because I was only 4, I had a younger sister at the time, or I had a younger sister as well. So she and I have 2 older sisters who were sort of, one only had 1 more year of high school at the time. And then my sister Kelly had 3 or 4 years of high school left. And so our family, because we had these older sisters, and then it was just Elizabeth and me, we kind of always, it was like we were 2 different families. Like we were this one family, but we had 2 very different experiences. Mm-hmm. And it was, I remember one of my earliest memories in church was, going to junior church in 2nd grade, and the teacher or the preacher that morning used a Barbie to describe hell, and they set that Barbie on fire with a lighter. And so,
oh my God.
Okay.
Wow.
So it's and so
I didn't know you were going there. I had no idea you were going.
That was not what I was expecting.
Yeah, no, that
either.
was that. And the preacher gave the Barbie a story. This is, she's got everything together. She's got kids, and she's got a family, and she's got the house, and but if she doesn't have Jesus, she's gonna burn in hell. And he set the Barbie on fire. And but what was more all encompassing than the church experience was a year after we switched churches, the pastor started a school that was associated with the church. And the church was where we learned all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And the school was where it was expected out of us to behave a certain way. And if we behaved in any way, shape, or form outside of that, it was, we were punished at school, then usually got punished at home. And so it was, the school was where all of the things that we learned became a part of our stories. And it was a daily thing. And so
I'm really curious about something. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, there's a weird delay, but I'm really curious about something in that, I understanding the ways in which children kind of conflate our relationships with our parents and our imagery of our parents with God, right? So very often the ways in which our parents talk to us and end up becoming reflective of, or kind of embedding in us, our images of God, right? And vice versa, our images of God. So how do you think your relationship with your parents changed because of this? Do you have any concept of that? I know you were really young, but.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a pre-Baptist mindset of how my parents were. Now, I've been told that they were different, and they had there was a certain aspect of their personalities that shifted. But my mom was a very anxious, my mom was always really anxious and nervous, and always a little bit insecure about, what was going on in her story. And so, one of the things that I wrote in one of my memoirs is that independent fundamentalism fit my mom like a straitjacket. Was very much this way of doing things that allowed her the ability to function, to feel at ease, as long as she was following the rules. For me, it and I have very much a lot like my mom's personality, I became real anxious. I became I remember having stomach issues as a kid, and just like that, there's beginning signs that I had was probably going to develop an anxiety issue. I was ADHD at the time, as well, but it was undiagnosed then. And so, I was the kid out of all four of us. I was the kid who felt it. I experienced the mood of how we interacted with God more than my sisters did.
When was the first time you actually had a thought that, if you remember, where you go, wow, if that's God, God's a little bit of an asshole?
Well, I would never have used the word asshole until I was probably about 23. I don't
obviously.
Yeah, but I you know what, Karen, I would never have had the freedom to say that God was like and then insert a negative modifier until college. And it was in college that I realized I was an asshole. Because I had this experience that I carried with me. And in college, I went to a community college in my little, and 30, 40 minutes away from my home. And that was where I met my very first atheist. That was where I met my very first, friend who was a Democrat. And that was when I met, somebody who seemed to like love abortion and like all those things. And so like I attacked all, like it was as if I I realized then that I didn't like who I had become or who I was. And and I'll tell you, the people that I met, they had a whole hell of a lot more grace with me than I was capable of showing or giving in return. And so, and the thing about fundamentalism and cult-like behavior is unlike the switch from Methodist to Baptist, turning off fundamentalism in your head is a long, exhausting, slow change. When I finally went away to college, every single change or shift in my belief system became another argument or another layer of chaos between me and my family. Yep. I remember when I went to, when I was 19, I went to see the very first movie in a theater. And I remember my mom finding out. And you would have thought that I had been found passed out on somebody's couch with, like doing lines of cocaine and you use. That was how my mom reacted to me going to a theater and seeing a movie. And there were tears involved, and there were like numerous phone calls back and forth from college to me. And so it was this, every change, every step away, it was this big dramatic thing. And so after a couple times when I was, starting to like explore things that are outside of what I was accustomed to, I just started keeping it a secret from them. And so like you just developed this really good way of what they didn't know didn't hurt them, but it was hurting me. And so anyway, it wasn't until I was probably in my third year of college where I would have been self-aware enough to be able to say that the God I met as a kid was an asshole. And that was like when the slow, again, years would go by before I was able to realize the depth of my like experience with that God and how that God affected my story. I mean, it would be 10, 12 years of just, going through these various stages and thinking I'm free, like literally I went from a Baptist church, and then I went to college and I went through that was when I went through my Calvinist stage. And so I thought that was I thought that was free. Like, I mean, I thought I was really,
you know what?
Felt liberal.
Matthew, I was going to say that Calvinism is kind of like a gateway drug.
It so is.
That's so, and that gives
so I had my.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Oh no! I was just gonna say so I had this Calvinist, experimentation phase in college that I often call it the experimentation phase. But and then even then, I had just moved from fundamentalism to Calvinism, and I mean, my mom and my dad, like we had a sit down conversation when I went home for summer about,
oh my gosh,
like you can't believe in that. You can't believe in predestination. What in the world, Matthew? But, and so you just like, God was like always, I loved God, but my soul, God was so frustrating. God was so exhausting.
Yeah.
And it would be, I guess, maybe when in 2005, I think that was when I really started to shift in my thinking, in my understanding, in my politics, in my, in my embracing of just freedom inside the God story.
So I want to go back, Matthew. You mentioned, and I'm going to ask you to explore this just for a moment, the grace that people had with you, because you reminded me when we did 30 years ago almost, we moved here and our next door neighbor was a renowned geologist, emeritus department head at UC Santa Barbara of geology. And at that time, I was trying to negotiate with him how Pangea could happen faster than, moving the continents, moving out, like it could have happened a lot fast, like it could have happened in 1,000 years or I don't know. And he was so graceful to me. He even started coming to my small group, and sang hymns that he knew back when he was, a young kid. And I just thought, in retrospect, this guy could have just lambasted me, but he didn't. He was more Christ-like. So explore that grace factor.
Well, it was in a statistics class, Statistics 101, that I sat. Somehow I ended up sitting in between an atheist and somebody who was voting for Clinton that year. and I got to know them prior to knowing anything about like what their belief systems were. Like I got to know them as fellow students in this, studying this class. And when I'll never forget the time when we were in between classes and I was standing out with them while one of the girl was having a smoke break, and I was just like listening to the story, and we stumbled into this conversation about politics that ended up like, showcasing not only was she a Democrat, he was an atheist. And like you would have, for me, it was like meeting somebody who didn't have like, it was like me meeting an alien to me, honestly, like somebody, a Martian. And it was, and so I remember getting so worked up. How can you not believe in God and having all of these things? and being real reactionary. And, and them being just like patient with me. And, I think that they were a little bit older than I was. And so like, they just, it just did not have an impact on them. And I'll never forget going to school after Clinton won the presidency, and the girl looking at me and me saying, and me making a comment about how sad it was today. And she was like, you know what? I bet you're going to be okay. And you know what? Also, all the women that I know, they're going to be better off because of what happened, what we did yesterday. And and she was not heated or not. It was just sort of, she said her piece and like, didn't necessarily I never felt shamed by them. And in my mind, I was shaming them.
Yeah. So what's fascinating to me that I think your story really points to is the fear that is inherent in fundamentalism, right? Because imagine how small a God must be if this would be a he God, that this God, this male God, right, that fundamentalists often believe in, would be so small as to not be able to allow his beloved creation to go forth into creation for fear of what would happen to you if you went to the movies, right? The fear that's involved in that. And what actually in truth points to a lack of faith, in my opinion, because you have to do all of this protection and all of this, right, to protect your faith. What kind of faith is that if it can't withstand a movie?
Well, absolutely right. But it was also it showcased in us for being people who literally went to church 3 times a week. We did all the things that Christians were doing, the singing in the choir, going to Sunday school, teaching Sunday school, participating in all the various things. And then also having, graduating from a school. And I had gotten the most spiritual award the year that I graduated. I have a plaque, by the way, that says the most spiritual.
You didn't bring it, did you?
But yeah, I didn't bring it. But for being that kind of person, the amount of fear that I felt, the amount of worry that I felt, that it was this, I've often said, as I gotten older and had conversations with my family, I've often said, if your faith is so strong, if your faith is so present, you've been doing this for almost 40 years. Why do you need to control everything? Why do you have to why does your faith have to have this crazy effect on somebody else's life? And, that's not, they don't know how to answer that.
Yeah.
I'm still struck with the idea that you have to, in some cases, you have to look outside of religion to find God's grace.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. That's a real thing.
And the time that I'm embarrassed to admit how long it took me to actually be okay with that, David. I had so much fear of not only God, but more effectively in my life I had a fear of my parents being disappointed in me. I had a fear of people that I grew up with being disappointed in me. And so that it wasn't until I stopped caring about everybody else's feelings about Matthew that I was able to get to a place where I could start to believe in a God that was outside, far outside, not just a little bit different, but way outside the very small box that I had gotten.
I love that. And so knowing all of that, I didn't know all of that about you before. And so hearing your story and how really, truly deep you were into what seems almost, like you said, cultish, right? This cult-like type of fundamentalism is where you are now, right? As a man who has, you came out as a gay man, was it last year? 2 years ago? 2 years ago now?
2.5.
2.5. Okay. Wow. So
yeah.
At some point, you had a moment, I'm assuming, where you said, "Oh, God is not an asshole." There's maybe you didn't, but maybe you did. And so was there a day? Was there a moment in time? Was it a slow dawning? Did it happen all at once? Like, what was that like for you when you said, "Wait, there's a God that loves me"?
Well, I long, like I said, it was like 2005, 2006 was when I really started to kind of do this deconstruction. It wasn't called deconstruction at the time. It was called the slippery slope or whatever. And so I really started to
the road to hell.
I really started to break apart and not necessarily need every little thing to fit together. All right. And so I remember there being times when I was able to easily find the grace and find that God who was not an asshole for other people. It was very much a different story for myself, because if I was to identify with this God not being an asshole, it would require me to hurt people in my own story. And I still get emotional about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I remember there being, David, you brought up when one of my children's books, When God Made You. I remember the moment I wrote a line in that book. It was the part where it says, you, when God sees you, God delights in who is and sees only what's true. That you, yes, you, in all of your glory, bring color and rhythm and rhyme to God's story. So be you, fully you, a show-stopping review. Live your life in full color, every tint, every hue. Discover, explore, have faith, but love more, and learn and relearn all that God made you for. And I remember writing that and just bursting into tears, and I could kind of burst into tears again, because I thought, man, I hope every little gay kid in church can learn to love themselves, can see that God loves them just as they are, that I may never get to a place in my story where I am able to fully embrace myself. But man, if I can open a damn door for somebody else, let that be.
I remember hearing you talk about writing that book, and you said that it was you said something to the effect of, and when you were just reciting that, I had chills all up and down my body and tears in my eyes, just FYI, which is similar to the first time I read the book. But I remember you saying that it was almost like you were getting a love letter to yourself from God. You said that one time in something that I heard you when you were talking about that book.
Yeah.
What a beautiful, beautiful love letter.
I thought that I was writing the book for my kids, and I thought that I was writing that book to everybody else's kids, but it in reality, I was writing the book that I needed to hear myself. And so, I slowly over time, over the course of a couple years after that book came out, I was able to find the love that I had given everybody else. I was able to start to discover that love for myself, and I was able to come out and tell the world that I was gay. And it's a wild experience to embrace God as your full self. It is a beautiful, beautiful thing to be able to come into God's presence and without shame, without all of the junk. I don't care that my mom and my dad still don't approve of me. But they don't get to define God for me. And that's a beautiful thing.
Thank you so much for being here today. We are people who have left behind performance-based religion and the shame that comes with it. Maybe you have a personal liberation story to tell, and we want to know about it. please contact us on Twitter at God is not an asshole or text 805-703-8393 because the world needs to know that God is not an asshole.